Welcome to Be Well with MS podcast series, where I and expert guests discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life to preserve brain health and quality of life living with MS. I'm Dr. Agnes Trokjana, neurologist, researcher, innovator at Torbay and South Devon NHS Foundation Trust in the UK. So today's guests, I've got two. Sam is an experienced nutritional therapist working to improve the health and well-being with all manner of health concerns. She uses diagnostic laboratory testing for a test, don't guess approach to more personalized nutritional advice, including action plans, menu suggestions, recipe inspiration, lifestyle advice, and supplement programs as necessary. Due to her personal connection to multiple sclerosis, she specializes in this area in very precise mode. She's passionate about education and work as a guest lecturer for colleges of integrative nutrition, covering models on multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's disease, mental health, and the role nutritional therapy can play. She has a vast majority of experience working with schools and colleges, creating workshops for students around the value of healthy eating practices, as well as direct involvement with school catering companies to provide nutritionally beneficial school lunches. So hello and welcome, Sam, to the show.
Thank you. Hello, Agnes. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Wonderful. Right. My next guest is Dr. Colin Bannon. Colin is my colleague, retired GP with a lifelong interest in preventing as well as treating illness, and now have the added perspective of living with multiple sclerosis himself. He grows food and tries to make sense of the lifestyle in the modern world. We met with Colin at one of the MS Information Days in 2018. And since in 2019, we have been running the healthy lifestyle clinics at Torbay and Southwest NHS Foundation Trust in the UK. Colin has received the Brain Health Award as part of working with my MS team at Torbay Hospital. So congratulations. Colin runs his own blog online where he explains complex issues in a very comprehensive and simple language. If you don't follow Colin, I highly recommend to do so. Have a look at his blog and subscribe. You will get some regular updates. So hello, Colin, and welcome to Be Well with MS episode.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, Agne. That's a very comprehensive introduction. I'm flattered.
Thank you. So Colin and Sam, today we're going to talk, I think this is my most favorite topic in general. When we talk about the lifestyle, there are so many aspects to tackle when we talk about the lifestyle, but the most important for me is diet and dieting and what the important role it plays in people's lives. So I just want to talk a little bit that this initiative is focused on brain health, and really the importance of diet is enormous. And I just want to just cover a little bit and go into a bit more personal level. And just, I would like to understand, what the brain health means to you personally. So maybe starting with Sam.
Hi, thank you. Well, for me, I think brain health is twofold. First of all, I think of the physical structure and function of the brain itself, which acts as our main control center for the whole body. So controlling our breathing mechanisms, controlling mobility and things like that. But just like I need to look after my heart health or my bone health or looking after my teeth or something, I feel like I need to eat well, I need to sleep well, and I need to manage stress in order to look after the actual tissues and functions of the brain. But the second element of brain health is really what we refer to as our mind. And this is kind of more concerning mental health. And so this for me is about keeping happy, keeping calm, and being resilient to the many challenges that we have in life today. So having a healthy brain is also about enjoying that sense of well-being. And it's particularly important to me, having celebrated a significant birthday this year, that I do look after my health, my brain health particularly, and preserve my cognitive function because I want to stay sharp. I want to be focused. I want to be able to maintain that sense of well-being whilst I live a very busy city-based life. I'm juggling teenagers, aging parents, house renovations, and running a business. So.
Yeah, it's all at the same time. It's always the case. It never comes as one, and that's the strength, the building the resilience, and that's an opportunity for everyone to learn from you, Sam, and get some advice and get exposure of your experience being busy woman, running the business, looking after the family, elderly parents, and running and advising people to be healthier with the nutrition advice that comes in the form of the dieting and lifestyle, which is an amazing opportunity. And I know that you're heavily involved into MS world, and because of your relative that is affected with this condition, I believe that's another perhaps reason that you would like to maintain that focus and build that sort of as a family, that the resilience. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Colin, what matters to you? What brain health means to you personally? I know that you have been into this field for many years as a GP doctor starting, and how does that evolve since you've been diagnosed with MS?
Well, thank you. I spent decades, I guess, looking at dealing with illnesses, really, and often was so tragically impressed by the way diet interacts and destroys health sometimes. My parents both died in relatively young with heart disease, and I spent decades, I suppose the first half of my career, looking at the effects, the damaging effects of smoking, because they were so predominant. But in the latter half, looking very much more at diet, with increasing weight, increased rates of all sorts of illnesses like MS and so on. And then along came my own. And at that point, I developed a more particular interest in keeping my brain functioning as well as I could, because I have to say that there are issues about memory and cognition that once you start losing a few of them, you begin to recognize how handy it is to have a really good memory and be able to think your way through life. And being 67 now with a 5-year-old grandson, I would really like to get to the age of 80 and see him enter life as a young man with as many marbles as I could possibly be left with, still functioning. And I think, with MS, of course, because we have this brain problem, there is that extra incentive to do everything that we can possibly do to keep on top of our game, really, and just make sure that we're always pushing the boundaries of staying as well as we possibly can.
Okay. And Colin, take me through, what is your morning routine? Let's say 60 minutes of your day in the early morning when you wake up. Well, what is your routine? Just for some inspiration. I'm sure that there are listeners that are looking for some advice, looking for some sort of exposure of how they should start the day. Well, what is your day like when you wake up?
Well, I'm retired now, so I will often get up and pour myself a cup of coffee and do some writing for half an hour. Usually, especially this time of the year when it's pouring down with howling gales outside and it's muddy. I tend to not start the day off with food. I leave that till later on, till 11 or 12, because I'm very much into this time-restricted eating thing. And to be honest, I've also found that removes a little bit of pressure for the morning, because all through my working life, you get up, you set the alarm, time's fairly tight between getting up, getting ready, going to work, everything's squeezed in, you have your breakfast with a cup of tea and off you go, and you get to work. And in some ways, aren't in a great state of mind at that point. And it's the nice thing about retiring is you can just do whatever things you want to do at a reasonable rate. And like Samantha says, sleep's so important. If you can get up, get your head together, do what you want to do in terms of a cup of tea or breakfast, if that's the way you start your day, but just try and get a sense of perspective of your day, and don't start the day in a sense of rush and panic. I mean, I'm speaking because that's what I used to do at work all the time.
Yeah. First step out of your bed, you sort of the way you feel, the way, whether you're slowing down or you're rushing, we always rush in the mornings, but perhaps maybe it sounds like slowing down, no matter what's going on in your life, whether it's a busy day, but, within this an hour or so, it's just getting into sort of a culture of spending time for yourself. And not necessarily your mornings should start with the big meals. So from what I gather is intermittent fasting is involved into your routine, Colin, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I think it's really helpful. I may come to that later on, but it's certainly helpful in a number of ways because it takes the mind, first thing in the morning, it takes the mind away from food. And if you know that you can have a breakfast later in the day, then you don't have to think about food. And not thinking about food when you're not eating is a great thing because it stops you snacking and craving and everything else. And really, that being able to relax in between between meals is a very nice thing.
Yeah.
So, intermittent fasting gets me off to the right start of my day.
Absolutely. So our modern life is so overwhelmed, with various different stimulus and experiences and food options and different diets, and there's a whole history of the food industry and how much are we influenced by agriculture? What is the evolution of the diet, Colin? If you could take us through a little bit, not to the extent, but just a little bit, so to get to understand how we evolved over the time.
Well, human beings have been around for about 250,000 years, and for the vast majority of that, we've just eaten whatever there is that there was at hand, whether it's meat or grains or pulses or milk or whatever. It was all fresh, readily available food in a hunting-gathering mode, but that all changed. I think about 30,000 years ago was really the onset of agriculture, and more so 10,000 years ago when we started herding animals, growing grains, and that changed the whole basis of society at that time. And in many ways, agriculture spread over the world fairly rapidly because it's such an efficient way of doing things. And it particularly in temperate climes, it makes life easier. And it carried on pretty much as it had been with developments of iron and use of horses and so on, but not developments we'd now recognise as phenomenal. But really everything has changed this last century, with industrial food production, so much food produced in factories as well as on farms, ultra-processed food, vast amounts of sugar, which is a particular interest of mine because we are eating phenomenally huge amounts of sugar compared to any of our thousands of ancestors. And I think this is having a big impact on food. So food's very processed. There's less fresh food. It has very long shelf lives and so on. But also since the war, things have changed for women because women don't spend. My mum in the 60s used to spend half the morning shopping and half the afternoon cooking. And that was what everybody did because you didn't have a fridge. You couldn't keep food for very long. Women's lives have changed since then. And that's a good thing. But of course, it means that now there's a lot more convenience food, a lot more fast food. And really the change between the shops my mum used to visit on a daily round every morning and a trip to the supermarket is a complete paradigm change in how we see food. Rather than, I remember my mum's shopping trolley, she didn't even have carry bags, was full of basically fruit, veg, meat, baked products and so on, all of which were fairly local. And very straightforward to choose. Whereas now you can go into a supermarket and you can choose between a healthy, nutritious diet, or you can choose probably the unhealthiest diet that human beings have ever eaten. So there are dangers and as well as opportunities in the way we're dealing with food nowadays.
Yes, I appreciate that. I think, when we see our patients in our clinics and they come in, they've got diabetes, they are very much depressed, anxious, they have obesity or overweight. And then what we do, we say, well, go and find a nutritionist, go and find the dietitian who could support you and help you. We do give some advice, of course, and we invite them into healthy lifestyle clinics, but I think that does not resemble it other sites and services. It's such a variability in practice. I think since the pandemic, we started being more aware of the diet impact on the general health and brain health. So I'm just trying to understand, Sam, why it is so important living with such a long-term debilitating condition such as multiple sclerosis, and what the role of the diet is. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of people with MS and diabetes and other chronic conditions. Do you have a good examples, maybe your caseloads, or, that people come, they are obese, they are overweight, and then you've been looking after them, and over the period of time, given advice that you gave, they have improved, and you have a real world evidence of living much healthier, thinking much more clear, and having less brain fog. What is your experience, and what's the role of the diet on the brain health?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a huge question, diet and brain health, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, the association between diet and brain health has been around a long time. This is not something that's new, from old studies looking at things like iron deficiency anemia on rates of intelligence and IQ in developing children. More recently, I see things with, the role of fish oils when we're looking at behavioral issues like ADHD and autism. So really what we're talking about when we're talking about diet and brain health, we're looking beyond what our diet is doing for us in terms of providing pleasure or energy just from consuming food. We're kind of talking about nutrients, breaking it down into nutrients that the diet gives us, whether it's the fatty acids, proteins, amino acids, various different vitamins and minerals and so on, because these are all the building blocks for the body's tissues as well as the brain. And in fact, the brain is 60% fat itself. And what we're seeing is we're starting to see now that studies are developing, we're coming up a long way with studies, and we're developing better means of monitoring things like diets in people, which has been more difficult traditionally to get anything more than cross-sectional studies or sort of the epidemiological studies. We're now getting more recent studies that are showing that a healthier diet is linked directly to reduced cognitive decline. And this is really important because MS is a neurodegenerative condition.
Yes.
Those immune processes are occurring within the brain. So it's very important for people with MS to have a nutritious diet that can help repair any damage caused by the inflammatory process, can even dampen the inflammatory process itself, can help nourish the various structures within the neuron, feeding the membranes, for example, to improve cell-to-cell communication, prevent against degeneration of neurons, providing the substrate for myelin in the first place for people with MS, and providing the energy within the cell to the mitochondria that produces the energy so that the cell can properly operate and do its job. There was actually a paper published in 2018 looking at data from about 7,000 people with MS, and they did an extensive questionnaire working out what people were eating and giving them a healthy score. They also looked at their lifestyle as well, things like smoking, exercise, and those then measured outcomes on depression and pain and fatigue and cognitive function. And what they found was that the people who were eating the healthier diets, so by healthier diet we mean more fruits, vegetables, legumes and whole grains with much less of the added sugars and red meat, these people had much lower level of disability with less severe depression. And when those healthy eating practices were combined with good lifestyle choices as well, this was associated with less severe depression and cognitive impairment as well as disability. And these findings are also coming through in other studies as well, that there are lots of benefits from eating a healthy diet and undertaking regular exercise. So it's really important for people with MS to embrace this as a treatment plan support in whatever program they're on in terms of managing their MS. It's really about understanding what that healthy diet is. So the fruit and veggies, along with spices and herbs, are so important as a main component in our diet because of the chemicals, the plant chemicals that they control, these polyphenols, which have been linked to a reduction of cognitive decline. As well as controlling for inflammation. And a lot of the research that's being done with diet and dementia at the moment is really giving weight to these eating patterns as well. So similar trends coming through in terms of preserving brain health in people who would otherwise be healthy without a chronic condition. So looking at patterns, for example, of the Mediterranean diet, a more traditional diet, those are kind of the patterns that we would want to see people with MS striving to achieve, because that's going to help with inflammation, immune system balance, and directly with cognitive health. And on the flip side, as Colin was saying, controlling the excess sugar in the diet, because similarly, we've got studies that show that diets that are high in sugar and saturated fat, like the typical Western style diet that we're all exposed to here in industrial societies, doesn't just contribute to heart disease and obesity, but is directly contributing to cognitive decline as well. So there was a very interesting Chinese study published this year, review study, that was discussing the role that sugar has on the inflammatory processes and driving autoimmune diseases and neuroinflammation, so brain health. And they've seen the two mechanisms where sugar, an excess of sugar, can affect us is directly ramping up the inflammation within the body systemically and within the brain, but also feeding our gut bacteria, the microbiome, the wrong types of carbohydrate fuel that further amplifies inflammatory processes. And I'm really interested in the field of nutritional psychiatry as well, which is something that's, it was a phrase that was coined back in 2015. And this is a field of research making that connection between food and mood. So using specific nutrients and diets or eating habits that can influence mental health and address things like depression and anxiety. And this is really important because depression is one of the main symptoms reported by people with MS. So in the last 5 years, there's been a good handful of studies reporting on that link between diets that are higher in fruit and veg and the increased happiness and well-being that gives as well, with quite a few meta-analyses, studies looking at lots of other studies that have been done, also seeing that link between a healthy diet and an increased feeling of well-being. And again, Mediterranean diet comes up with that as well as being linked to a reduced risk of depression. One of my favorite trials, the SMILES trial, which was the first intervention study. So this was looking at a group of people in Australia who were presenting with moderate or severe depression, but otherwise healthy. And they put them on a 12-week program, so not a very long program at all, just a 3-month program, giving them a very healthy diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, lots of fish, whole grains, lots of variety, lots of colors, and they were blinded against another group of people who were receiving talking therapies and support in a different counseling kind of environment. And at the end of the trial, what they noticed were at least 30% of the people who had been on the dietary changes had a complete remission of their depression.
How powerful is that? It's just simple diet that could affect the way people feel and how they live their lives, because it's a bi-directional, flow of things. You eat well, you feel better. You feel better, you eat better. So there is a link. There is a huge connection, right?
Yeah, and in terms of my own practice, what I do with my clients is, first of all, we tidy up the diet. We'll spend the first few sessions just really focusing on tidying up the diet. And 9 times out of 10, the first thing someone will say to me at the second or third appointment is, I feel so much better already. I mean, it's just that overwhelming sense of more energy, increased sense of well-being, enjoying foods more, exploring my relationship more with food as well. Just simple interventions, making various switches and changes.
Yeah. I guess the diet, the recommendation perhaps, in the simple terms, the way I would interpret everything you just said is the more colors on the plate, the better. It stimulates your microbiome, your gut immunity, which is, we have emerging and more evidence that is growing of the microbiota, that involvement in regulating and development of the immune nervous system through the gut and brain axis. So it's really important. There are some sort of metabolites found in the oral microbiome. Some of them, such as inositol, which is a sugar alcohol product that is responsible of the hormone regulation. So thyroid stimulation hormone, follicular stimulation hormone, and insulin resistance in our body. So almost like MS is becoming a metabolic disease, through all the, the chains of the reactions in our body that regulates the hormones. So what we eat is super, super important from the physical perspective and mental health perspective. And there is no other way, yes, medicine are powerful, and we are strong advocates for managing MS with the disease-modifying therapies and using and starting it early, but complementing that with a proper diet is something to go for.
Yeah, right. I would say that would give you the best chance.
Yeah, absolutely. So Colin, a question to you, and I'm just trying to understand, that there are so many diets and so many different names. Some of them are more evidence-based, some of them less evidence-based diets, specifically in multiple sclerosis. Do we have any diet that is superior to other diets well known in multiple sclerosis? What is the current research?
Well, it's very tricky, as Sam was just saying. There's lots of research going on, and it was so interesting listening to Sam. But you said the first thing to do with any diet is just to tidy your diet up. I love that way of looking at it. Just get the crap out of your daily eating regime. And that's such a big step, because in a way there's a lot of diets around for MS. The big one is the Overcoming MS diet. That's one part of its regime for people staying well with MS, which is essentially whole food with seafood. And there's a Wild's diet from America, another doctor with MS, which is very different in that it advocates meat and dairy, I believe. And then there's a ketogenic diet, which is different again, because that only recommends leafy vegetables, and it's quite heavy in meat and dairy. And then there's a Mediterranean diet, which we've just referred to already, which is probably, highly regarded now because there's so much research behind it. Mm-hmm. But they are all so different from the Western diet that for anybody thinking about which of these diets to choose, as Sam so eloquently said, just tidy your diet up. Get the Coca-Cola out of your diet, get the sugar out of your diet, get the real garbage, ultra-processed food out of your diet. If you're having a Mars bar every afternoon, stop that. A, you'll feel so much better, and B, you'll save yourself quite a lot of money. So I think that there are diets there that all have a lot to be said for them. Mm-hmm. No doubt we all eat the food we want to eat. And as Sam also said, the important thing is to eat food that makes you feel well. Mm. When I was a GP, we were very, we didn't have much time. adding dietary advice to the end of each 10-minute consultation was tricky. So I focused on sugar and just said, get sugar out of cups of hot drinks, stopped having sugary canned drinks and obvious sugary foods, biscuits, buns, cakes and confectionery. That was my advice. And people who stuck to that just felt so much better. Mm-hmm. So whichever diet you choose, concentrate on how you feel. And if you feel better, that's the diet for you.
Yeah. And what are the, maybe this is a question for both of you. I'm slightly worried, like, let's say I'm a patient or I'm just a human being without MS or with MS. Doesn't matter. It affects everyone. We live in a community. We all have to look after our health and brain. And once you establish like a routine, you know, is there a healthy way to eat the same thing every day? Like, or should we look for the variety of things and change it over the time? Like, you know, if my breakfast is a yogurt and oats in the morning with some berries, you know, should I think about getting eggs the following morning? You know, is there sort of do we have any advice on that sort of a change? And, you know, how should we just, if we establish, we feel good on it, we just continue, or should we sort of bring more variety in day-to-day dieting? Maybe Sam.
Okay. Yes, 100%. They say variety is the spice of life, and it truly is. So when you specifically say about what you're eating for breakfast, you know, I'm having oats and what did you say? I'm having yogurt and oats and some berries or something. Well, my advice would be, can you change the grains occasionally? Could you switch your oats to a muesli with mixed grains occasionally? Can you switch the berries? Can you make, you know, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries? You know, because what the science is really showing us now is that the greater the variety that you eat in your diet, particularly of the plant foods, then the more diverse and the more robust and healthy your microbiome, which, as we mentioned before, is communicating all the time with the brain and delivering metabolites that can protect the digestive system and in turn can protect the brain and even directly support brain health. So a healthy diet is one that will support you throughout life and provide you with a longer health span. So you will get to an older age being healthy and maintaining that vitality and quality of life later on in life. So having a plant-focused diet that is seasonal and varied, and being seasonal is a good way to bring in variety, but also thinking of color, because as I mentioned before, the color is the polyphenols and the different flavonoids, the different plant chemicals, and different colors contain different versions of those plant chemicals, and each one has a different way of operating within the body and a different way of protecting cells and boosting our brain health. So essentially,
and these are antioxidants. The phenols are the antioxidants that you get from plants, from the vegetables, from the fiber, isn't it?
Yes.
Berries.
Yes. Things. Yes, exactly. It's the colored pigments in plants and berries. So different colored lentils, different colored onions, for example, different colored peppers. They would all produce a different reaction in the body and a different mechanism of protection as well. Right. So the sort of
anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, preserves the brain health. It's anti-aging. It slows down the aging process and so many more benefits. And I think this is so valuable to have that information and knowledge about things. And we quite often, when we run our healthy lifestyle clinics with Colin, we hear about the options of oils that are available for cooking. And I know that with our current Western diet, it's really challenging to keep the balance of omega-3, 6, and 9, you know, because we get a lot of omega-3, less omega-6. And And there are certain oils that have got, more omega-6 than omega-3, I think. And then there are a bunch of people that would take omega-3 supplements, which is a great idea in general. According to the population studies, if you take vitamin D3 and omega-3 in combination, you may prevent from developing autoimmune condition by 20%. So any healthy population should think about it seriously and consider that vitamin supplement. But then, should we take and what supplement of omega-3 or 6 or 9 or all of 3, and what sort of oil should we use, because that's where the omega-3, 6 and 9 come from. Sam, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, so generally you're right. So these omega oils are actually called the essential fatty acids, and they're called essential because we can't make them in the body and we have to get them from the diet. And they're really important in the structure of our cell membrane, and we are only just a collection of cells, whether we're skin cells, hair cells, bone cells, heart cells, blood cells. We are just a collection of cells. So having healthy cell membranes allows a healthy function of each of those cells. And it's particularly important for people with MS to have a very healthy cell membrane. And this should be nice and fluid, and the essential fatty acids, those polyunsaturated fatty acids, the ones that are liquid at room temperature, are the ones that allow for this healthy cell membrane. And the omega-3 and omega-6 also have the added benefit of being very anti-inflammatory in the body. Omega-9, which is what we get from olive oil and avocados and some of the nuts, doesn't have so much of an effect on our inflammatory status, but it's very important to prevent degeneration. It's a very good antioxidant in the body.
Should we use vegetable oil for cooking and olive oil as a drizzle on our salad? How should we sort of day to day, how should we prepare the meals, and being conscious and mindful that we are getting enough omega-3, 6 and 9 in a balanced way through the diet?
Yeah. So it's important to get reasonably high levels of omega-3, in fact, every day, because it is the most difficult to absorb as it competes with the other fats as well. And if we get too much of the omega-6, then we can not get enough of the omega-3. And then that too much omega-6 could be pro-inflammatory. So the omega-3 oils are what we get when we eat oily fish like sardines, mackerel, herring, anchovy, salmon, halibut, those oily fish, but also they're in plant foods like flax seeds and flaxseed oil, walnuts, chia, hemp. But when you buy, for example, flaxseed oil, because it's such a good source of omega-3, it's actually very unstable and we mustn't cook with it at all. So it's a really excellent choice for a salad dressing. Mm-hmm. And that's so getting omega-3 every day. We could have oily fish a couple of times a week. We could make sure that we're getting some chia seeds on your oats in the morning, Agne. But also we could be using flaxseed oil, for example, in salad dressings. When it comes to using something like vegetable oil for cooking, that is something that's been quite adulterated by the food industry, and it's been exposed to quite a high level of processing, which has ultimately stripped it of any real benefit, and certainly doesn't have any nutrition in it whatsoever. So my recommendation would be to use an extra virgin olive oil, which is stable, which means that its smoke point it's around 200 degrees. And by smoke point, I mean when the oil begins to become oxidized or start smoking, it becomes dangerous. And then it's actually doing us more harm than good. Mm-hmm. So we want to keep the oil temperature not too high. So we're not talking about deep frying foods here, because we're not talking about these unhealthful food practices necessarily. We're talking about
these
maybe
are saturated fats,
right? Yeah, we're talking like a sauteing process. And because it's difficult to control that temperature, personally, I use a water-based liquid when I'm cooking on the hob. I'll use a bit of soy sauce and water, or I'll use a bit of stock, or sometimes I use a cooking wine, but I'll use my extra virgin olive oil to roast veggies, to put a little bit on fish if I'm putting a piece of white fish in the oven in a little parcel, because I know I can nicely control the temperature of the oven. And because there are so many antioxidants within olive oil itself, it stays stable at that temperature, and we're able to get that value from the oil itself as well.
So if somebody likes still to cook with the oil, so perhaps maybe dilute that with the water, add a little bit water or broth, or
if you're cooking on the hob and you feel like you need that little bit of oil to maybe bring a bit of
flavor
what you're cooking, then you can certainly help bring the temperature down by putting in a little bit of water, because water will heat and evaporate at 100 degrees, much lower than the oil. So that can help you control the temperature on the hob.
Yeah, wonderful. That's really practical advice, and I'm going to take that into account for my family cooking. And many more listeners are going to really dig deeper and understand and perhaps adopt these new approaches of cooking, because it's really important, and it's such a frequent question when we talk and discuss about the cooking, and it's a skill at the end of the day, and it's something that you build up over the time. But knowing the nutritious value and what the impact on your body and how it affects you at the molecular and cell level, it really makes a huge difference when you make the decisions towards the food. A lot of people these days too say to me, healthy eating is very expensive. Healthy food, organic food is really expensive, and now we're living in in an energy crisis. There is a living crisis. A lot of people struggle financially. What would be, maybe both of you could give me a bit of advice, and for the listeners and patients, how should we plan things in our life? Should we buy bulk rice in big bags and sort of and prep our meals and freeze them? Because I may be wrong, but frozen vegetables are not that harmful to our body. Maybe it tastes differently, but it still has got some nutritious value. Any comments, Sam, practical advice for people to still stay very fit and well with their proper diet, but perhaps not spend a lot of money on it?
Yeah, well, one of the things that came out of the SMILES trial as well was exactly what you're saying, that people often think that to cook from scratch and to cook everything fresh can be more expensive. And when they actually looked at the cost of the diet that they put people on, it actually worked out cheaper than the average food bill that people were already spending. But you're right. Buying certain products in bulk can be helpful. And as you said as well about using the freezer department. So, frozen veg, frozen fruit, often, flash frozen as soon as it's picked, can be fresher than sometimes the fruit and veg on the supermarket shelf. And it's not going to go off either. There'll be much less waste when you're buying frozen. Similarly, fish. I mean, we all think we're buying fresh fish, but it's often been frozen. Maybe not for you guys in Devon, but certainly here in London, it's been frozen on its journey to us overnight. So buying frozen fish is not any less fresh than buying the fresh fish, and again is cheaper. Occasionally using tinned fish, tinned sardines, tinned mackerel, even tinned salmon. Can be cheaper and a good way to get those oily fish without spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
Things like reducing the amount of meat that you eat and eating more of the vegetarian proteins is cheaper as well. Beans and pulses tend to be a lot cheaper than having a meal. Can you have a couple of meat-free days a week as well? I'm a big fan of leftovers. My mum's always laughing at all the little pots and Tupperware boxes in my fridge, because quite often if I have leftovers after a meal, I will reuse it and double it up. So, for example, if we'd had a lentil stew one night, to feed 4, and I've just got the 1 portion left over or something, then it might be used the next day as a side dish with something else that we're having. So
being creative, isn't it, is using the creativity and adding other products for the following days is something to
and use it, like, don't wait for things to become, like, if you start to notice things are becoming super wilted or sort of going a bit wrinkly, chuck them up, throw them in a pan with some boiling water and blitz them into a soup and put it in the freezer for another day. Or herbs, when they start to become a little bit past their best, chop them up, put them in a little bag and put them in the freezer, and they can just be thrown in and added to stews or soups again another time. There are lots of ways to kind of cheat. And often people will just buy sort of snacky kind of foods when they feel like they're hungry, and it's a false economy. If you eat a decent meal and you've had some whole grains, you're going to feel less hungry later on. So sort of switching from white bread to wholemeal bread, for example, and having a fiber-rich breakfast might mean that you later on are not snacking or reaching for a bag of crisps mid-morning, something like that. So, making the switch to more healthy foods and making your meals more balanced can also help you cut down on spending on things we don't really need in our diet.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And my sort of a personal question: I've got a chili in the fridge, and it's been 24 hours. Should I still eat it? But how long can I keep food, leftovers in my let's say?
Certainly 24 hours. Certainly you can keep. Did you say you've got like a chili?
Yeah.
Yes, certainly 24 hours. I mean, I do tend to. I do sort of tend to operate with a taste test, and if it's fine, I go for it.
Okay. So there's no rule like we should.
We do have to be careful with, obviously, meat.
Preparing
food. My freezer.
Colin?
Preparing food's the other thing. I've got a smart meter at home, and you can't notice once you've got 2 rings on the hob on and the oven going as well, the costs are really quite astronomical. They're adding up now. And I read some data earlier on about the Eat Well project from government, who estimated that half the population, to follow government recommendations regarding nutrients, healthy amount of nutrients in the diet, half the population would be spending 30% of their income on food. And there's 1 in 10 households would have to spend 70% of their income to get what the government think is a healthy diet. But I think they're looking at it in the wrong way, because, as Sam said, there's lots of cheap ways of doing it. Pressure cookers are a bit old-fashioned, but they save, up to 90% of the energy you use on cooking, on boiling vegetables. Otherwise, microwaves can be very inexpensive compared to ovens. And also, as Sam said, storing, bulk cooking, storing food, buying food in bulk if you can afford to do that. There is a real crisis with food at the moment. There's also a crisis that's also fictitious, because we think that good food is expensive, and I think good food and good cooking, as Sam said, is cheaper than buying lots and lots and lots of tasty processed items off the shelves in supermarkets. And I think there's going to have to be a cultural change, because there's just so many families struggling with food nowadays.
And Colin, do you have any experience air-based? Do you remember some of the patients are using some devices that it's sort of
air fried chips? I think came up once, didn't they? I'm not sure. I don't like the idea of heating oils up too much, but I know that chips and spuds are a British staple, aren't they? And they're still fairly cheap despite a poor harvest this year. But I think everybody's going to have to, not skip back a generation or two to, like, mothers in the past who would carefully map out their shopping through the week. They'd have a list which they'd stick to, not go to a supermarket and think, oh, I'll just have some of that and some of that and some of that, and then you're astonished by the bill. There's so many people struggling with money. They're going to have to be very, very careful with food. And I think there does need that cultural change to make people think, well, simple soups and stews, and there's very, very many dishes that are actually a lot cheaper than we might imagine. And if we can reduce the 30% of food that we waste, if we reduced it totally, that would be a 30% saving anyway. So there is lots of thinking that we all need to do about how to keep ourselves healthy and to keep ourselves solvent in this day and age. Absolutely.
Sam, I met so many people who are vegans, vegetarians, and they are so unhealthy. They have obesity, they have diabetes, hypertension, MS, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and they come with a polypharmacy. What common mistakes people that we believe that they should be healthy? They are vegetarian, they eat a lot of plants, they get a lot of antioxidants. What's the common mistakes do we have here? What's the matter?
Yeah, you're right. I see this a lot as well. People assume they're healthy because they're vegetarian or vegan, and it's just not the case. What people tend to do on a vegetarian diet, particularly when you're on a Western style diet to begin with, is take out the meat and fish and load up on the cheese and eggs instead. And cheese works really well as a substitute in most places where they would otherwise have had meat. And actually cheese is more calorific than meat. And similarly for vegans, I know lots of people have come to see me saying they want a really healthy diet, they're on a vegan diet. And when we look at what's actually happening, they've just replaced their diet, the meat in their diet, with a meat substitute. So something that's heavily processed. It could be soya protein, something like that, but it's been heavily processed and enhanced with extra sugars and fillers and salt and things and other chemicals that we don't even understand what they are or what they even look like. And people are fooled into thinking that they're healthy because they have a vegan symbol on them. They've actually started putting vegan symbols onto some packets of crisps. So it's kind of assuming that a food, just because if it's labeled vegan, it must be healthy. And it's obviously it's not just like that.
All these fancy vegan vegetarian products that you buy at some shopping centers, perhaps if it has got more than 5 nutrients written on the label, so they are going to be full of sugar, salt, and they're heavily processed. So I guess our approach is the simpler, the better, and we just leave these sort of a fancy made, prepped in advance vegan vegetarian options for some occasions, but day-to-day living should be, if you are vegetarian and vegan, it should be very simple. Boiled potato, a few vegetables, starchy and leafy, I guess. What would be sort of advice people who are vegan and vegetarian?
Yeah, just remember that you are ultimately following a plant-focused diet, and load up again on the veggies, but don't forget beans and lentils. And I don't know if it's because of the way our society is currently in this modern day, but we seem to have fallen out of love with beans and lentils. People have lost the skill of knowing what to do with them, how to eat them, how to incorporate them. So when you're not brought up on a diet like that and you suddenly decide midlife to become a vegetarian or a vegan, you're not used to eating these kinds of foods, which are a valuable source of protein. And it's really important to remember to include them in the diet. A plant-focused diet is much lower in calories generally than a regular diet, and it can leave you feeling hungry if you haven't balanced your meal properly with sufficient good fats as well as the proteins. And you will get that from foods like the legumes, the beans, the pulses, nuts and seeds, which contain the good fats, as well as the avocados, and then using those beneficial oils, which I love drizzling on everything, whether it's extra virgin olive oil, flaxseed oil, some of the other interesting nut oils as well, like walnut oil. And so other people, they might find themselves hungry if they haven't properly balanced their meal. And again, they're reaching into a biscuit tin for a vegan biscuit, thinking that they're still being really helpful.
Yeah.
So it's still really important to get that balance. To make sure, because protein, provided by beans and pulses, whole grains, and in some of the nuts and seeds as well with those good fats, that all produces satiety and will make you feel full up. And then you'd be less likely to reaching for unhealthy snacks. So
absolutely. When we've done the survey and after running the healthy lifestyle clinics, we ask questions and we dig into sort of what people actually use, how many spoons of sugar do they use, how many fizzy drinks and sugar drinks energy drinks do they drink. So when we ask the question, how many sugar do you use for your tea or coffee, they say maybe 1 or 2, but then they sort of have 7 cups of teas a day. And then when we asked about the energy drinks, so they have 4 bottles of energy drinks that are full of sugar. So being mindful that not necessarily added sugar is quantified as a sugar. There are so many hidden sugars in the products that we expose ourselves. So be mindful, limiting the amount, limiting the portion. So if you can tackle your health with a diet by at least 70%, you're going to feel less foggy in your mind. You have enormous amount of energy. Your general health will improve. Your weight will go down without doubt. And if you add on exercise program, you're spot on. You're fit and well, and it's all beneficial for brain health. And you're going to nourish and nurture yourself, and it's going to expand your lifespan. You're going to live longer. Now, the last thing that I would like to cover, and I think we all have to a certain degree that level of the behavior towards the food. We have emotional eating. I think I haven't met anybody who's not like that. The food is our fuel, and sometimes we build up a very unhealthy relationship with the food. Do we have any evidence in multiple sclerosis or general population, Colin, about binging, emotional eating 7 times a day? How does that feel from your perspective, and what data do we have to support that?
Yeah, again, it's changed over a generation, I think, and there's lots of good studies from America where there's one in particular that gave I think it was about 50 people an app on their mobile phone and just asked them to photograph everything they ate or drank over this period of about a week. And sure enough, they found out that people were eating throughout the day, 7 to 12 times a day was I think the average that they're eating. And quite a few people would wake up in the middle of the night, think, right, just nip down to the kitchen, have a glass of milk and a cookie or something, go back to bed. It really was 24 hours eating in that particular study. And I think there is a reflection of that, where people are getting up early, having a breakfast straight away, having a supper at tea time, and virtually having no time where they're working hard to process all the calories that are going in. And I think that's one of the advantages of fasting or time-restricted eating, is that you lose that link between stress and eating. Because so many of us will, have a bar of chocolate or a packet of crisps when we're feeling stressed. And I personally believe that's a link that's almost entirely been made by the advertising industry and supermarkets and the huge food complex that seems to run the way we eat. And it's a wonderful thing if you can break it. If you can just eat your food for the pleasure of eating it, and in between meals, forget about food altogether, you're going to be in a much healthier place. There is absolutely no need for anybody to have snacks in between meals under any circumstances, really. But if you do feel like one, you can always have a banana or some nuts or something healthy. But really, there's never any need for snacks. there's at least a day's worth of calories, probably a lot more, stored away in our liver. So it's quite straightforward to go without food. I think that would, getting back to 3 meals a day would be good. Getting back to, or moving on to a position where you're having not eating at all for 16 hours a day and confining your food to 8 hours a day, which is very doable. Because for a lot of us, that means just having a later breakfast and not eating after tea time. That would improve a lot of people's health. But times are difficult. There's a lot of people struggling. There's a lot of stress in the world. And I think that its first thing to do is to recognize that link between feeling unhappy and rewarding yourself with food. If you can break that link, then your health's going to be improved considerably, because the weight will fall off, and all those little items of low quality snacky food that litter our supermarkets will leave your lives, and will feel very much better for it.
The psychologists I work with, the advice would be, when we feel so upset and emotional and depressed and moody, and we don't know what to do, so we always should ask the question, how can I help you at this right time moment to feel better? We should quite often be mindful and ask that question. How can I help you? How can I help me to feel better at this right moment? So, and it's not necessarily is a bar of chocolate. There are so many ways you could go and have a walk. You can distract yourself. So many other activities, play the guitar, play the piano, read a book. So perhaps the first healing step is acknowledge the information that, okay, I've got this. This is really upsetting, and I've got this emotional eating. So it's first step to healing is awareness, bringing awareness that I've got this disorder. It's there, but there are ways to overcome, and usually paying attention and distracting moments, and then finding what would nourish at that particular moment when the urge to go to the fridge and open the fridge and take anything from the cupboards that are full of sugar. Processed foods are easy to make, takes 2 minutes or so, but not necessarily it's a great fuel and resource to preserve the general health and the brain health in particular.
Yeah.
To finalize, it's a trendy topic about our global warming and environmental impact of our food industry. I can tell you that in general, healthcare contributes around 4% to carbon emission. The pathways in medicine contributes to 40% to carbon emission. So I wonder what the sort of the food industry is like, and how can we prevent our environment. I believe so. The plant-based nutrition is the one that is a bit more friendly to environment. Do you have any data, Colin, on that at all?
I think in broad terms, if you divide it into the sort of diets you discussed, vegan diets, in terms of CO2 emissions, are responsible for about 1 kilogram per 1,000 kilocalories eaten. Vegetarians slightly more, omnivorous diets about twice as much, and the ketogenic diet about 4 times as much. But they're very broad figures for something that's a lot more complex, because you can have some very healthy nuts that have come all the way from China, with a big carbon input, and you can buy some meat or dairy products made locally, which are very much less. So I think Sam mentioned this earlier, if we can eat seasonally so that there aren't huge storage costs with all the CO2 implications, if we can eat food that's bought locally, I mean, it's tougher in London. Down here in Devon, we've got wonderful opportunities, and this is true for all the counties, and in London as towns as well, increasingly, to buy food that's been made by the nearest farmer you can possibly identify, so that cuts down food miles. I mean, I'm very lucky because I grow my own food, because so most of my soups and stews have literally gotten 0 food miles, which I'm very lucky. My eggs come from my chickens, which are 50 meters up the garden. So again, there's no food miles associated there. And if you can grow your own food, then of course you're solving so many problems in terms of climate change, and that's definitely something that's on the up nowadays. There's a long waiting list for allotments. There's more and more small holdings around, and growing food is a wonderful thing because it ticks all the boxes for brain health. If you're out there in the sun, exercising in your garden, growing healthy organic food for yourselves, I cannot think of a better recipe for health, both for ourselves and for our families.
Wonderful.
And, yeah.
Right. Okay. So to summarize our discussion today, what we need in this life is a proper diet. Diet is not expensive if you're planning carefully. I think we are influenced by food industry, and our choices when we go shopping, these colorful things around, it really impacts how we make a decision towards the food. The simpler, the better. The more color on your plate, the more is going to nourish your microbiome. There is a huge link and a direct link between the guts and the brain and how it functions. So the more we look after ourselves, the more mindful we are making these decisions towards the diet, the better we're going to feel. And our general outcome out of this is to live long, healthy lives. And we can only help ourselves by doing and planning and making the food, by cooking, learning, enjoying new skills. It's a skill. It doesn't come over the night. It's something that you build up, and just for your general health and brain health, to preserve the brain health, to reduce the rapid neurodegenerative process living with MS, and to reduce the inflammatory response within the brain, and to reduce the activity of these individual inflammatory cells. Diet is the key, plays a key role beside very innovative medicine that we use to control the disease activity. On its own, diet perhaps not good enough, but as a supplement is an amazing opportunity to live healthier, to be better, to live long lives. So thank you very much, both Sam and Colin. It was such an opportunity for me to learn so many great things. I'm pretty sure that listeners who are listening to our podcast and the video casts are going to enjoy, and they learned a lot of things that will implement in day-to-day living. I'm going to talk to you again. I think we have a certain amount of time to talk about this important topic. We need to regroup again and talk about various different aspects, because there is a lot to learn and a lot to implement and help people with MS. My last thing that I would like to ask you to ask a question to another Be Well with MS podcast guest on brain health. We have a few people coming. I'm not going to tell you names, but they are clinicians or nurses or psychologists or MS registered data manager is coming to talk about the smoking and alcohol. What would be your sort of a question to the speaker who's my guest who's coming next?
Whoa.
I need to probably say that Adam and Sarah asked about the overcoming emotional eating and behavior towards the food issues, because we discussed with Adam and Sarah about depression and anxiety issues living with MS. But I think that during the whole conversation, we covered these aspects and we gave a couple of practical tips and advice how to overcome emotional eating. But now it's time to Colin and Sam to ask a question for the next guest.
I would say there's so much for MS nurses to cover in their clinics, and I would just wonder how they would condense this vast area of research and psychology and agriculture and food and technology that we've just been discussing into 1 or 2 minutes that they might have at the end of their consultations. Because for me, as I said earlier, it was always about saying, oh, look, if you can just get sugar out of your diet, I'll be delighted. And I was really impressed by how that made people feel better. And I mean, the other great thing about the Healthy Living Clinic, I must say, is because you get people together in groups and run through this, because it might get a bit disheartening for the nurses to have to go through the same advice to every patient over and over and over again. It's, I guess, condensing those loose ideas, my question would be, how do you motivate yourself to overcome the challenge of helping people improve their lifestyle when you have so many other boxes to tick on your clinical list?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Colin. Sam, probably you agree with that question, and thanks for coming. Thanks for being part of my show, and I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
Yes, very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.